Blood trickled down Elijah Washington's cheek as the flight attendant's wedding ring left a small gash. Stunned passengers gasped. None knew this slap would collapse America's largest airline. None knew this 15-year-old boy's father controlled enough wealth to rewrite aviation history. The cabin intercom crackled. "This is your captain speaking. Before we dive into this shocking story that transformed the airline industry forever, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination while traveling, and subscribe to our channel for more true stories of justice and transformation. Now, let's find out how one father's response to his son being slapped changed aviation forever. Jamal Washington was not a man who accepted the word impossible. Growing up in a cramped apartment in Harlem with 5 siblings and a single mother who worked 3 jobs, he learned early that the world wouldn't hand him anything. By 16, he was coding in a borrowed school computer lab at night, his fingers flying across keyboards while his peers slept. By 23, he had founded WashTech from his tiny studio apartment, focusing on cybersecurity solutions when most tech giants ignored the field. "They called me the janitor," Jamal once told Forbes magazine. "When I showed up at venture capital meetings, they assumed I was there to clean. I had to prove myself 10 times over just to get in the room." That drive made WashTech the industry leader in digital security by the time Jamal turned 35. 3 successful IPOs later, his net worth exceeded $20 billion, placing him among America's wealthiest individuals and one of only 3 black billionaires in the country. His portrait hung in the National Museum of African American History, showing a stern-faced man with intelligent eyes and a closely trimmed beard, elegant in his tailored suit but unmistakably uncomfortable with the attention. Despite his wealth, Jamal encountered racism daily. Sales associates followed him in high-end stores. Restaurants claimed to be fully booked until his assistant called using a different name. Car dealerships insisted on speaking with the actual buyer when he browsed showrooms. Once, security guards detained him while he was inspecting a property he already owned. "Money doesn't make you white in America," he told his son Elijah during one of their weekly dinner conversations. "It just gives you a better view of the problem." Elijah Washington inherited his father's quiet intensity and analytical mind. At 15, he was already taking college-level courses online while attending Westridge Academy, an exclusive private school where he was one of only 7 black students in his grade. Lanky and thoughtful, with his mother Serena's warm brown eyes, Elijah navigated between worlds. Among wealthy peers, he downplayed his family's fortune, preferring to blend in rather than stand out. In Harlem, visiting his grandmother's neighborhood, he felt both connected to and removed from his roots. "You carry 2 legacies," Jamal told him. "Your ancestors who survived the unimaginable, and the responsibility that comes with our position now. Both require you to stand tall." Jamal worked tirelessly to give Elijah normal experiences despite their extraordinary circumstances. They attended basketball games incognito, Jamal in hoodies and baseball caps. They took the subway occasionally, Jamal pointing out the infrastructure investments needed in different neighborhoods. And sometimes, they flew commercial instead of using the family's Gulfstream jet, which Jamal insisted was important for Elijah to understand how the world actually works. That's why, on June 12, they booked first-class tickets on Continental Airways Flight 2857 from New York to Atlanta. Elijah's grandmother Pauline was celebrating her 75th birthday, and while the Washingtons could have easily flown private, Jamal believed this trip provided an educational opportunity. Continental was America's largest carrier, with over 5,000 daily flights and a market capitalization of nearly $40 billion. It was also facing a quietly growing number of discrimination complaints that airline executives had systematically buried. What Continental's leadership didn't realize was how deeply the Washington family's influence extended into transportation and technology industries. WashTech provided security systems for 37 major airports. Washington Capital had significant investments in aircraft manufacturing. The Washington Foundation funded transportation equity studies examining racial disparities in travel experiences. Continental CEO Richard Davenport had even attended the same charity gala as Jamal 2 months earlier but had brushed past him with a cursory handshake, never recognizing that the unassuming black man in the corner was one of America's most influential business leaders. That oversight would soon cost him everything. Elijah Washington adjusted his backpack strap and handed his boarding pass to the gate agent at JFK's Terminal 5. The agent glanced between the pass and Elijah's face, her expression shifting subtly before she scanned the document. "First class is boarding now through the left lane," she said, her tone neutral as she returned his pass. Elijah nodded politely and walked toward the jet bridge alone. His father had stepped away to take an urgent call from Singapore, promising to board before final call. This wasn't unusual. Jamal Washington operated across time zones, and Elijah was accustomed to his father's brief business interruptions. Continental Airways prided itself on its first-class service, especially on its transcontinental and major domestic routes. Flight 2857 to Atlanta featured the airline's premier domestic configuration, spacious leather seats, complimentary premium cocktails, and attentive service from its most experienced flight attendants. Brittany Reynolds had been with Continental for 15 years, having joined right after college. At 37, she considered herself a consummate professional who had seen it all: celebrities traveling incognito, Wall Street executives too drunk to stand, entitled passengers demanding impossible accommodations. With blonde hair pulled into a tight bun and expertly applied makeup that concealed growing fatigue lines, she projected practiced efficiency. What passengers didn't see was Brittany's mounting personal frustration. Her divorce 3 years earlier had left her financially strained despite her senior position. Continental's recent contract negotiations had frozen wages while executives received record bonuses. She was struggling to make payments on her condo in Queens, and her application for a management position had been rejected last month in favor of a younger, less experienced colleague. "It's always about who you know, not what you know," she had complained to her coworker that morning as they prepared the galley. 15 years of perfect evaluations, and Derek gets promoted after 3 because he plays golf with Michaels. As Elijah approached row 2, seat A, Brittany was arranging welcome champagne flutes for the 8 first-class passengers. She glanced up, her eyes quickly assessing the teenager in designer jeans and a simple black hoodie, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Excuse me," she said, moving to block his path. "First class is boarding now. The main cabin will begin boarding shortly." Elijah stopped. "I'm in 2A, he said quietly, extending his boarding pass. Brittany frowned slightly, taking the document. She studied it longer than necessary before returning it with a tight smile. "Of course. Would you like help finding your seat?" "No, thank you," Elijah replied, sliding past her into the window seat. Brittany continued her preparations, but her eyes drifted repeatedly toward Elijah. When a middle-aged white couple boarded moments later for seats 2B and 2C, she greeted them warmly without checking their boarding passes. "Welcome aboard, Mr. and Mrs. Donovan. So lovely to see you again. Can I get you started with champagne or perhaps our signature Manhattan?" Elijah noticed the difference in treatment but remained silent, pulling out his physics textbook as more passengers filed aboard. His father had prepared him for these moments. "Document, don't escalate," Jamal had taught him. "There's a time for confrontation and a time for observation." As the cabin filled, a corpulent white businessman in his 50s took seat 1D across the aisle. Tyler Harrison was a real estate developer from Manhattan, a Continental Platinum Elite member who traveled weekly. He immediately began arranging his belongings, spreading newspapers across his seat and the empty one beside it, dropping crumbs from a bagel he'd brought on board. "Brittany, darling," he called out. "The usual Bloody Mary, extra spicy. This morning's been hell." "Coming right up, Mr. Harrison," Brittany responded cheerfully, rushing to prepare his drink while ignoring the scattered mess. When she returned to offer pre-departure beverages to the rest of first class, she approached Elijah last. "Orange juice?" she asked, not offering the full range of options she'd presented to other passengers. "Water, please," Elijah replied, looking up from his textbook. She returned with a plastic cup of water while other passengers received glass tumblers. The cabin continued filling with economy passengers. Brittany's colleague, Marcus Wright, a younger black flight attendant working the main cabin, noticed her interactions with Elijah and frowned slightly. He'd experienced Brittany's subtle racism before but remained silent, needing the job too desperately to risk conflict. As final boarding was announced, Jamal Washington hurried down the jet bridge, his phone call concluded. He was dressed simply in charcoal slacks and a navy cashmere sweater, carrying only a leather portfolio. Though worth billions, Jamal cultivated inconspicuousness, a survival tactic from years of navigating predominantly white spaces where standing out often meant trouble. From the doorway, he immediately spotted Elijah and noticed the plastic water cup, the textbook, and his son's slightly tense posture. A father recognizes these things. Something wasn't right. His eyes narrowed as he observed Brittany's stiff movements around his son compared to her animated conversations with other passengers. Jamal had seen this pattern hundreds of times. The realization settled in his chest like a cold weight. Elijah looked up and gave his father a small nod that contained volumes of unspoken communication. "Sir, we need to continue boarding. Please find your seat." Brittany's voice cut through Jamal's observations, her tone noticeably cooler than the one she'd used with previous passengers. "2C," Jamal responded, showing his boarding pass before making his way to join Elijah. As Jamal settled beside his son, the cabin filled with the chaotic energy of final boarding. Overhead bins slammed shut. Passengers squeezed past each other in the narrow aisle. Flight attendants made final preparations for departure. "Everything okay?" Jamal asked quietly. Elijah gave an almost imperceptible shrug. "The usual." Brittany Reynolds moved efficiently through the cabin, checking seatbelts and ensuring compliance with pre-takeoff procedures. When she reached row 2, her eyes lingered on Elijah's backpack tucked partially under the seat in front of him. "That needs to go completely under the seat or in the overhead bin," she said sharply. Elijah nodded and bent forward to adjust it, but Brittany was already reaching for the overhead bin above their seats. "Let me just put it up here," she said, her tone suggesting impatience. "It's fine, I need my book," Elijah responded, pulling his physics text from the bag before pushing it fully under the seat. Brittany's lips tightened. The bin would be better. From across the aisle, Tyler Harrison looked up from his phone. "Come on, Brittany, the kid's fine. My stuff's taking up half the damn cabin." He gestured to his belongings sprawled across 2 seats and spilling into the aisle. Brittany's face flushed. She disliked being corrected, especially in front of other passengers. "I'm just following protocol, Mr. Harrison." "Seems like selective protocol to me," Harrison muttered, loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. The tension in the cabin ratcheted up several notches. Jamal placed a calming hand on Elijah's arm, silently communicating patience. Brittany turned away, visibly flustered, and continued her preparations. When she returned minutes later with final drink service before takeoff, her movements were jerky with suppressed anger. As she leaned across to hand Jamal a glass of water, Elijah reached up to adjust the air vent. The timing couldn't have been worse. Elijah's elbow accidentally bumped Brittany's arm, causing water to splash across her Continental Airways uniform skirt. "I'm sorry," Elijah said immediately, reaching for his napkin. "Let me help." "Do not touch me." Brittany snapped, her voice slicing through cabin conversations like a blade, drawing all eyes toward them. "This is a brand new uniform." "It was an accident," Jamal interjected calmly. "My son apologized." "I've had enough of this," Brittany hissed, her professional demeanor completely abandoned. "First disrupting boarding, then the backpack, now this? This isn't how we behave in first class." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. In seat 1D, Tyler Harrison's face darkened with anger. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Jamal asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Elijah reached for his water glass, hoping to defuse the situation. "Dad, it's okay." Brittany misinterpreted the movement. Perhaps she thought he was reaching for her. Perhaps 15 years of accumulated frustrations, financial anxieties, and unexamined biases crystallized in that single moment. Whatever the reason, what happened next would change everything. Her hand lashed out in a quick, sharp motion. The sound of the slap echoed through the suddenly silent cabin. Elijah's head snapped back, more from surprise than force. Brittany's wedding ring caught his cheekbone, leaving a small cut that immediately beaded with blood. Time seemed to stop. Passengers froze in shock. Marcus Wright, standing at the rear galley, dropped the coffee pot he was holding. In the stunned silence that followed, the shattering glass sounded like an explosion. Blood trickled down Elijah's cheek. His eyes, wide with disbelief, filled with tears he refused to shed. Brittany stood perfectly still, her hands still raised, horror dawning on her face as she realized what she'd done. "You struck my son," Jamal stated, each word precisely enunciated. His calm was more frightening than any shouting could have been. Tyler Harrison was on his feet instantly. "I saw the whole thing. That was assault. Captain needs to know now." Other passengers began speaking all at once. "Did you see that? She hit a child. Someone's recording this, right? Call security." Brittany's shock transformed into desperate self-preservation. "He was reaching for me. I felt threatened." "He's 15 years old," Jamal said, his voice still unnaturally controlled as he pressed his handkerchief against Elijah's cheek. "And you just committed assault." The cabin intercom crackled. "This is your captain speaking. Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." Marcus had already rushed to the cockpit to inform Captain Maxwell Burke of the situation. Moments later, the captain's voice returned, now tense. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay. Please remain seated while we address a cabin situation." 2 airline representatives and an airport security officer boarded minutes later. Brittany immediately approached them, speaking rapidly, gesturing toward the Washingtons. Her body language suggested she was positioning herself as the victim. Jamal stood, his full height and presence commanding attention. Without raising his voice, he addressed the security officer directly. "My name is Jamal Washington. That flight attendant just struck my son, a minor, causing physical injury. We require immediate medical attention, documentation of the incident, and the captain's presence." The security officer's expression changed subtly at the name, Washington. He'd seen Jamal on the cover of Business Week last month. "Mr. Washington, we'll address this immediately," he said, his tone shifting to one of deference. Brittany recognized the change. Her eyes darted between Jamal and the officer, confusion replacing her defensive posture. "Do you know who I am?" Jamal asked her directly. Brittany shook her head slightly. Jamal leaned closer, his voice for her ears alone. "You have no idea what you've just done." Richard Davenport was reviewing quarterly projections in his corner office at Continental Airways headquarters when his phone rang. The CEO rarely took unscheduled calls, but his executive assistant's voice held an unusual urgency. "Sir, Linda Matthews from Legal is calling about something called the Washington incident. She says it's critical." Davenport sighed heavily. "Another passenger complaint, no doubt. Continental received dozens daily, most handled by customer service representatives with standardized apology emails and discount vouchers for future flights. Only the most severe reached Legal, and only the truly exceptional made it to his desk." "Put her through," he said, already mentally calculating how quickly he could end the call and return to his projections. "Richard," Matthews began without preamble, her normally composed voice tight with tension. "We have a situation on Flight 2857 at JFK. A first-class passenger was physically struck by one of our flight attendants." Davenport frowned. "Struck? That's unfortunate. Standard termination for the attendant, appropriate compensation package for the passenger. Why does this require my attention? Because the passenger is Elijah Washington, son of Jamal Washington. And Mr. Washington witnessed the entire incident. For a moment, the name didn't register. Then Davenport's blood ran cold. Washington. Washtec Washington. $20 billion net worth Washington, Matthews confirmed. The flight's been deplaned. Washington is demanding to speak with you personally, and he's retained Harrington and Schmidt. Harrington and Schmidt was the most aggressive civil rights law firm in the country, known for 8- and 9-figure settlements against corporations in discrimination cases. Jesus Christ, Davenport whispered. What exactly happened? As Matthews detailed the incident, Davenport's mind raced through implications. Continental had successfully buried dozens of discrimination complaints over the years, a well-oiled machine of confidential settlements and strategic PR. But this was different. This was Jamal Washington, one of the most powerful black executives in America, whose son had been physically assaulted by a Continental employee. Call an emergency board meeting. Now, Davenport ordered, already loosening his tie. And get me everything we have on Washington. Within 30 minutes, Continental's executive leadership gathered in the crisis management room. The tension was palpable as Matthews played a video already circulating on social media. A passenger's recording of the slap and its aftermath. It's been viewed 200,000 times in the last hour, said Omar Phillips, head of public relations, his face ashen. Twitter is calling for boycotts. The hashtag Don't Fly White Skies is trending. White Skies referred to Continental's marketing slogan, reaching new heights in white glove service. The racial implication of the consumer reinterpretation wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Chief Financial Officer Victoria Chin interrupted, her voice tight. Stock is down 7% and falling. Trading might be halted if this continues. This is containable, Davenport insisted. We've handled discrimination claims before. Not like this, Matthews countered, pulling up a document on the projection screen. I've compiled a summary of Washington's influence. WashTec provides cybersecurity for 37 major airports, including 6 of our hubs. The Washington Foundation funds transportation equity research that's been cited in congressional hearings. His venture capital firm holds significant positions in aircraft manufacturing, including a 3% stake in Aerogen, our primary supplier. The room fell silent as executives processed the connections. He could cripple us, Chen whispered. Has Washington made any statements? Demands? Davenport asked. Nothing, Phillips reported. He's gone completely silent, which frankly terrifies me more than if he were giving interviews. His lawyer only said he'll be in touch. The flight attendant? Davenport asked. Brittany Reynolds, 15 years with Continental. Clean record, though. Matthews hesitated. Though what? Davenport pressed. There were 3 passenger complaints alleging discriminatory treatment in her file. All from minority passengers. All resolved with standard vouchers. Nothing escalated. Davenport slammed his hand on the table. Why wasn't this addressed? We have protocols. The uncomfortable silence that followed spoke volumes. Everyone knew Continental's protocols were designed to minimize legal exposure, not address underlying issues. Call Washington. Offer whatever it takes to make this go away, Davenport ordered. I'll speak to him personally. 6 calls to Washington's office went unanswered. His personal number went straight to voicemail. Continental's legal team prepared escalating settlement offers, starting at $5 million. Meanwhile, the storm intensified. Continental assault trended globally. Civil rights organizations issued statements condemning the airline. Celebrities and influencers shared boycott pledges. Stock continued its freefall, losing nearly 15% by market close. I've got a question for all of you watching. do you think corporations should be held accountable when their employees discriminate, or is this just one bad apple that doesn't reflect the company? Comment number 1 if you believe Continental Airways should face serious consequences, or number 2 if you think this incident was just an individual employee's mistake. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed discrimination that went unaddressed, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice and accountability. Now, what do you think Jamal Washington is planning while Continental's executives panic? Let's find out. By 6 p.m., the incident dominated every major news network. CNN's banner headline read, "Black teen slapped by flight attendant, billionaire father witnesses assault." MSNBC featured a panel of experts discussing racial bias in the travel industry. Even Fox News covered the story, though their cheering questioned, airline overreaction or justified response. Good Morning America secured an exclusive interview with Tyler Harrison, the businessman who had witnessed the entire incident from across the aisle. "I've flown over 2 million miles with Continental," Harrison told the somber-faced anchor. "I've never seen anything like it. The Washington kid was polite, quiet, reading a physics textbook, for God's sake. That flight attendant targeted him from the moment he boarded. I watched her check his boarding pass twice while not checking anyone else's. I watched her give him a plastic cup while everyone else got glass. When she hit him," Harrison's voice cracked slightly. "When she hit him, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. That could have been my son." Harrison's testimony proved devastating for Continental, lending credibility to allegations of discrimination from a white, wealthy, frequent flyer who had no connection to the Washingtons. By evening, investigative journalists were digging deeper. The New York Times published a damning article titled "Pattern of Prejudice: Continental's Discrimination Problem." The piece revealed that Continental had settled 27 discrimination complaints in the past 5 years, all with confidentiality agreements. Former employees spoke anonymously about an unwritten policy of extra scrutiny for passengers who didn't fit the Continental profile. The Washington Post interviewed Marcus Wright, the black flight attendant who had witnessed the incident. Though clearly nervous about potential repercussions, Wright confirmed that Brittany Reynolds had a reputation among minority crew members. "We called it flying while black with Brittany," Wright admitted. "We knew to be extra careful on her flights because she'd report you for the smallest infractions. Several colleagues requested not to work with her, but management ignored the requests. Continental's hastily arranged press conference only exacerbated the crisis." CEO Richard Davenport appeared visibly uncomfortable, reading a prepared statement that struck many as inadequate. Continental Airways deeply regrets the unfortunate incident aboard Flight 2857. The behavior displayed does not reflect our company values. The employee in question has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. We are reaching out to the affected passengers to address their concerns directly. When pressed about Continental's history of discrimination complaints, Davenport grew defensive. "I reject the premise that Continental has any systemic issues with racial bias. This isolated incident." The room erupted with shouted questions. How is it isolated when you've settled 27 similar complaints? Why was Reynolds still employed after multiple discrimination reports? Has anyone from Continental actually spoken with the Washingtons? Davenport abruptly ended the press conference, a decision analysts immediately criticized as further evidence of the company's inability to address the crisis appropriately. Meanwhile, social media became a platform for others to share their Continental experiences. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack collected thousands of stories from black passengers who had faced similar treatment, not just on Continental, but across the industry. Many shared videos, documented encounters, and email chains showing inadequate corporate responses. A particularly viral post came from Grammy-winning artist Deion Jackson, who tweeted, "Continental flight attendant made me move from first class to coach until boarding completed to verify my ticket 3 years ago. When I complained, they gave me 5,000 miles and ignored me. Time for change." #FlyingWhileBlack #Continental Assault. By day's end, Continental stock had dropped 22%, erasing nearly $9 billion in market value. Competitors scrambled to distance themselves, with Delta and United both announcing expanded diversity training programs and independent audits of their customer complaint systems. Throughout this media tsunami, the Washington family maintained complete public silence, which only intensified speculation. CNN's business analyst noted, "Washington's silence speaks volumes. He doesn't need press conferences or social media. This is a man who controls enough wealth and influence to remake an industry from behind the scenes." For 15-year-old Elijah, watching the story unfold was surreal. The small bandage on his cheek had become a symbol in news graphics and social media memes. His school friends texted constantly, oscillating between concern and excitement at his sudden fame. Some classmates he barely knew suddenly wanted to connect. Others, particularly some white peers whose parents worked in aviation, grew distant. In the privacy of the Washington family's Upper East Side penthouse, Elijah struggled with mixed emotions. "I don't want to be known as the kid who got slapped," he confessed to his father that evening. "People look at me differently now." Jamal nodded thoughtfully. "Public attention is rarely comfortable, son. But sometimes, it's necessary for change." "What are you planning?" Elijah asked, recognizing the strategic gleam in his father's eyes. "Something long overdue," Jamal replied. "Continental's problem isn't just one flight attendant. It's a culture that enabled her, executives who buried complaints, and a system designed to protect the company rather than address harm. The question isn't what I'm going to do about Brittany Reynolds. The question is what I'm going to do about Continental Airways." That night, as Elijah slept, Jamal made a series of phone calls from his home office. To his attorney at Harrington and Schmidt. To 3 fellow billionaires who owed him favors. To the transportation secretary, a former business school classmate. To his investment team at Washington Capital. By morning, Jamal Washington had set in motion a plan that would transform American aviation forever. 5 days after the incident, Continental Airways still had not heard directly from Jamal Washington. Every attempted contact went unanswered. The company had terminated Brittany Reynolds, announced a comprehensive review of its complaint procedures, and pledged $10 million to create a new passenger rights initiative. None of it stemmed the bleeding. Continental's stock had lost 30% of its value. Bookings were down 42%. Social media remained relentless, with celebrities and influencers publicly canceling their Continental frequent flyer memberships. Inside the Washington residence, Jamal worked methodically from his wood-paneled home office, orchestrating a response that went far beyond what Continental executives could imagine. On his screens, multiple dashboards tracked Continental's stock price, social media sentiment, and internal communications that his cybersecurity team had legally obtained through business relationships with the airline's technology vendors. Jamal paused his work when Elijah knocked on the open door. The cut on his son's cheek was healing, but the emotional impact lingered. "Got a minute, Dad?" Elijah asked. Jamal immediately closed his laptop. "Always for you." Elijah settled into the leather chair across from his father's desk, his expression troubled. "Everyone at school's talking about it. Some kids are treating me like I'm some kind of celebrity for getting hit. Like it's cool or something." Jamal nodded. "People often don't know how to respond to someone else's trauma. They turn it into entertainment because that's easier than confronting the reality." Jason Mitchell said his dad thinks we're just playing the race card for money, Elijah continued, his voice tight. "That if a white kid got slapped, nobody would care." Jamal leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Let me tell you something I learned early, son. When you're black in America, everything you achieve will be questioned. Every injury you suffer will be minimized. Some people will always be more comfortable believing we're gaming the system than acknowledging the system was built to exclude us." He gestured toward a framed photograph on the wall, Jamal's grandmother standing proudly in her nursing uniform in 1960s Alabama. "Your great-grandmother couldn't enter hospitals through the front door, even wearing that uniform. She couldn't eat in the hospital cafeteria. Every day she endured humiliations I can barely imagine, to build a better future for our family. Jamal's voice softened. What happened to you on that plane wasn't about money. It was about dignity. About being treated as fully human. The same indignities happen to black people without wealth or connections every day, and the world keeps turning because they don't have the power to make it stop. So what are we doing about it? Elijah asked. Really doing, not just for us. Jamal smiled, pride evident in his expression. That his son's first concern was for the broader impact, not personal gain, confirmed he was raising him right. Let me show you. For the next hour, Jamal walked Elijah through his developing strategy. It wasn't merely about punishing Continental or seeking compensation. It was about fundamental, systemic change. Continental offered us $30 million this morning, Jamal revealed, pulling up the email. With a confidentiality agreement, of course. Elijah's eyes widened. That's a lot of money. It's nothing, Jamal countered. A rounding error on their balance sheet. Hush money to make us go away and let them return to business as usual. I declined. What did you ask for instead? Nothing they can give within their current structure, Jamal said, a hint of steel entering his voice. What's needed isn't a settlement, but transformation. The following day, Jamal finally broke his public silence by announcing the formation of the Washington Initiative for Travel Equality, WITE. With initial funding of $50 million from the Washington Foundation, WITE would document discrimination in transportation, advocate for policy changes, and provide legal assistance to affected travelers. The announcement sent shockwaves through the industry. Continental's PR team initially tried to spin it positively, releasing a statement that they welcomed the Washington family's constructive approach and looked forward to potential collaboration. Jamal's response was swift and devastating. During WITE's inaugural press conference, he systematically dismantled Continental's reputation. Continental Airways has settled 27 discrimination complaints in 5 years while implementing 0 structural changes. They've terminated Ms. Reynolds as if she were the disease rather than a symptom. Their passenger demographics show first-class cabins that are 94% white on an airline serving cities that are, on average, 40% minority. Their executive team includes no black vice presidents. Their board has one token person of color who also serves on 11 other boards. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled journalists. This isn't about one slap or one flight attendant. This is about an industry that has systematically devalued the dignity and humanity of passengers of color since commercial aviation began. And it ends now. The press conference dominated news cycles for days. Continental's attempts to counter the narrative fell flat. When Brittany Reynolds gave a tearful interview claiming she'd been scapegoated for a momentary mistake, social media erupted with previously undisclosed incidents from passengers who had experienced similar treatment from her. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Jamal was implementing the most audacious part of his plan. Through a network of shell companies and investment vehicles, Washington Capital had begun systematically acquiring Continental Airways stock as the price plummeted. Each press release, each new revelation, each viral video drove the price lower, and Jamal bought more. By the end of the second week, his team had quietly amassed a 7% stake in the company. By the end of the third week, as panic selling continued, they controlled 12%. Continental's executives remained oblivious, focused entirely on crisis management and stemming customer exodus. Their quarterly earnings call was a disaster, with Davenport fumbling questions about discrimination policies and diversity initiatives. Then came the moment that changed everything. Brittany Reynolds, increasingly isolated and vilified, released a bombshell statement through her attorney. Continental Airways management was aware of previous complaints about my treatment of minority passengers. In 2019, after 2 formal complaints, I was scheduled for customer interaction training that was repeatedly canceled due to budget constraints. My supervisor told me explicitly not to worry because, and I quote, "These complaints never go anywhere, especially from those passengers." The statement included emails corroborating her account, exposing Continental's systemic negligence. Reynolds' attempt at self-preservation instead confirmed the institutional nature of the problem. Continental's stock plunged another 15% in a single day. And Jamal Washington kept buying. The letter arrived on Richard Davenport's desk on a Tuesday morning, 43 days after the incident on Flight 2857. The Continental CEO had aged visibly in the past 6 weeks, his once confident demeanor replaced by haggard exhaustion. The company had lost nearly 40% of its market value. Bookings remained depressed despite aggressive discounting. Key institutional investors were privately expressing concerns about leadership. The envelope bore the WashTec logo, Jamal Washington's primary company. Davenport's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. The contents were brief and devastating. Pursuant to SEC regulations, this letter serves as official notification that Washington Holdings LLC, Washington Capital Partners, and affiliated entities have acquired a combined 27.3% equity stake in Continental Airways Incorporated, making our consortium the largest shareholder. As such, we are requesting an emergency meeting of the Board of Directors to discuss significant governance concerns, including potential leadership changes. Sincerely, Jamal Washington. Davenport read the letter 3 times, his mind struggling to process its implications. 27%. In just 6 weeks, Washington had acquired more than a quarter of the company without triggering any alarms. He immediately summoned Continental's legal team and investment bankers. The emergency meeting that followed was chaotic. How did we miss this? Davenport demanded, slamming the letter on the conference table. 27% doesn't happen overnight. Chief Legal Officer Patricia Moore looked equally stunned. The purchases were made through multiple entities, each staying below the 5% threshold that would require SEC disclosure. It's called a creeping acquisition. Perfectly legal, but designed to catch us off guard, Davenport finished. Can we stop him? The investment banker from Goldman Sachs cleared his throat uncomfortably. A poison pill defense might be possible, but it would likely trigger shareholder lawsuits given the circumstances. Washington has cultivated enormous public sympathy. And he may not be done buying, added Victoria Chen, the CFO. Our stock is still depressed. He could easily increase his position. What does he want? Davenport asked, though he already knew the answer. Control, Moore said simply. And given the current sentiment among other shareholders, he might get it. Continental's board convened the following day. The tension in the boardroom was palpable as directors grappled with the existential threat facing the airline. Several had already received calls from Washington or his representatives, testing their loyalty to current management. Davenport proposed a desperate measure, White Knight defense, seeking acquisition by United Airlines to prevent Washington's takeover. Absolutely not, countered Gregory Winters, Continental's longest-serving director. United would gut us for parts. Besides, the Justice Department would never approve it on antitrust grounds. Then what's your solution? Davenport snapped. Before Winters could respond, the boardroom doors opened. Jamal Washington entered, followed by 2 attorneys from Harrington and Schmidt. Though invited as the largest shareholder, his arrival still sent a shock through the room. In person, Washington projected quiet authority. Dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit with no tie, he took a seat at the far end of the table without waiting for an introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice measured, I appreciate you accommodating this meeting on short notice. I'll be direct, Continental Airways has a systemic discrimination problem that current leadership has repeatedly failed to address. This failure has damaged the company's reputation, destroyed shareholder value, and most importantly, harmed countless passengers who deserved dignity and respect. Davenport attempted to interject, but Washington continued seamlessly. Over the past 6 weeks, my team has interviewed 73 former Continental employees and reviewed over 5,000 passenger complaints. The pattern is undeniable and the corporate response has been consistently inadequate. He slid folders to each board member. You'll find detailed documentation of discrimination incidents, management responses, and statistical analyses showing disparate treatment of minority passengers. You'll also find my plan for comprehensive reform, which will require new leadership. This is outrageous, Davenport sputtered. You're exploiting one unfortunate incident to seize control of an airline. Washington's expression remained unchanged. Mr. Davenport, this is not about one incident. This is about a pattern of discrimination that you and this board have systematically ignored. As for seizing control, I've legally purchased shares in an undervalued company. That's capitalism. The room fell silent as directors paged through the folders, their expressions growing increasingly troubled. Washington continued, I've also spoken with institutional investors representing another 32% of outstanding shares. They've indicated support for leadership changes. The implication was clear. Between Washington's shares and supporting institutions, he potentially controlled nearly 60% of the company. You're bluffing, Davenport challenged, but his voice lacked conviction. The shareholder meeting is in 3 weeks, Washington replied calmly. I'm prepared to call for a vote of no confidence in current management. Given recent events, how confident are you in the outcome? Over the next 3 hours, the boardroom became a battlefield of corporate governance. Davenport and his allies argued passionately for maintaining current leadership with enhanced oversight. Washington countered with specific failures of that same leadership, his command of details devastating. As the meeting extended into evening, directors began shifting allegiances. Washington's reform plan, far more comprehensive than anything Continental had proposed, addressed not just discrimination but operational inefficiencies his team had identified during their research. By midnight, it was over. The board voted 9-4 to accept Washington's leadership proposal, including Davenport's resignation and a transitional CEO until a permanent replacement could be found. 2 weeks later, at an extraordinary shareholder meeting, Jamal Washington was elected chairman of Continental Airways. His acceptance speech, broadcast live across business networks, would be studied in business schools for years to come. Transportation is not a luxury, it is a fundamental right in modern society. When we allow discrimination to persist in our transportation systems, we are effectively restricting the movement and opportunities of entire communities. Continental Airways will now lead the industry in creating truly equitable travel experiences, not because it's good publicity, but because it's good business. Treating all passengers with dignity isn't just morally right, it expands our market, strengthens our brand, and builds sustainable value for shareholders. In her apartment in Queens, Brittany Reynolds watched the broadcast, her future uncertain. Her lawsuit against Continental for making her a scapegoat had been quietly dropped by her attorney after evidence emerged of her consistent pattern of discriminatory behavior. No airline would hire her. Her social media accounts had been deactivated after months of harassment. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her single impulsive action, slapping a teenager she'd perceived as undeserving of first-class service, had irrevocably altered her life. And transformed an industry. Continental Airways disappeared on January 1st of the following year. In its place rose Unity Airlines, with a new logo, new uniforms, and a revolutionary approach to commercial aviation. The rebranding, personally overseen by Chairman Jamal Washington, was the most visible sign of the carrier's transformation, but far from the most significant. Within the first 100 days of Washington's leadership, Unity implemented the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in aviation history. Every employee, from baggage handlers to executives, underwent intensive bias recognition training developed by leading experts in sociology and psychology. Unlike previous corporate diversity initiatives often criticized as superficial, Unity's program included ongoing assessment, practical scenarios, and accountability measures tied to compensation. The company established an independent oversight board comprised of civil rights leaders, customer experience experts, and transportation equity advocates. This board received direct access to customer complaint data and the authority to recommend binding policy changes. Unity's hiring practices underwent radical revision. The executive team, previously 92% white and 78% male, was restructured to reflect the diverse communities the airline served. Marcus Wright, the black flight attendant who had witnessed Elijah's assault, was promoted to lead a new passenger advocacy department that reported directly to the CEO. "This isn't about optics," Jamal explained during a CNBC interview 6 months into the transformation. "This is about perspective. When leadership reflects diverse experiences, blind spots diminish. Problems get identified earlier. Solutions become more comprehensive." The physical travel experience changed as well. Unity redesigned its boarding procedures to eliminate subjective crew decisions about passenger documentation. New technology allowed contactless verification of boarding passes and seat assignments, reducing opportunities for discriminatory treatment. Most radical was Unity's Transparency Dashboard, a public website displaying real-time data on passenger complaints categorized by demographic information, resolution timeframes, and satisfaction ratings. No other airline had ever voluntarily exposed itself to such scrutiny. "Sunlight is the best disinfectant," Jamal noted when questioned about the potential PR risks. "By making our performance visible, we create constant pressure for improvement." The aviation industry initially regarded Unity's changes with skepticism. Competitors predicted financial disaster, suggesting passengers cared more about low fares than social justice. Industry analysts questioned whether Washington was prioritizing ideology over shareholder value. Those doubts evaporated when Unity posted its first quarterly results under the new model. Passenger bookings had increased 17%. Load factors, the percentage of available seats filled, had improved across all routes. Most surprisingly, the airline's Net Promoter Score, measuring customer loyalty and satisfaction, had jumped from industry-lagging to industry-leading. "Treating people with dignity turns out to be good business," Jamal observed dryly during the earnings call. Who could have imagined? Competitors scrambled to respond. Delta accelerated its diversity initiatives. United established a passenger rights committee. American Airlines hired a chief equality officer reporting directly to the CEO. One by one, industry practices began shifting toward the Unity model. The Transportation Department took notice. Secretary Maria Hernandez convened an industry roundtable on passenger rights, with Jamal Washington as keynote speaker. The resulting guidelines, informally dubbed the Washington Standards, established new expectations for equal treatment in commercial travel. 9 months into Unity's transformation, an unexpected letter arrived at Jamal's office. The return address belonged to Brittany Reynolds. Jamal considered discarding it unopened. The former flight attendant had become a divisive figure, portrayed as either victim or villain depending on the observer's perspective. After the initial media frenzy, she had largely disappeared from public view, reportedly working in retail while pursuing a degree in social work. After careful consideration, Jamal shared the letter with Elijah, now 16 and increasingly involved in his father's efforts through a youth advisory council at Unity. "It's addressed to both of us," Jamal explained. "It's your decision whether we read it." Elijah hesitated only briefly before nodding. "We should hear what she has to say." The letter was unexpectedly thoughtful. "Mr. Washington and Elijah. I've written this letter many times in my mind over the past year. No words seem adequate for the harm I caused. My actions that day were inexcusable. While I've lost my career and reputation, I recognize these consequences pale compared to the trauma I inflicted on a 15-year-old who did nothing wrong. The past year has been a painful journey of self-examination. Working with a therapist, I've confronted unconscious biases I long denied. I've had to honestly ask myself why I reacted differently to Elijah than to other passengers. The answers were uncomfortable but necessary. I'm not writing seeking forgiveness or employment. I'm writing because your response to my terrible action has transformed not just an airline, but conversations about dignity and equality in everyday interactions. What you've built at Unity Airlines has become a model beyond transportation. I'm now studying social work and volunteering with a community organization addressing systemic racism. If anything positive can come from my grave mistake, perhaps it's this: one more person committed to being part of the solution rather than the problem. With deepest regrets and sincere admiration for your work. Brittany Reynolds. Elijah was quiet after reading the letter, his expression thoughtful. "Do you think she's sincere?" he finally asked. "I think sincerity is less important than impact," Jamal replied. "If her experience leads to genuine change in her behavior and choices, that matters more than her feelings about it." 2 weeks later, Jamal made a decision that surprised many. Unity Airlines launched an industry-first, Accountability to Action program, hiring reformed individuals with documented histories of discriminatory behavior to serve as trainers in its corporate education program. Their first-hand testimonials about recognizing and addressing bias became a powerful component of Unity's approach. Brittany Reynolds was not hired. The direct nature of her offense against a minor made that impossible, but her letter helped shape the program's development. The initiative received both criticism and praise, but like many of Unity's innovations, it was eventually adopted by other companies seeking to address discrimination comprehensively. By the one-year anniversary of the rebranding, Unity Airlines had not only recovered Continental's lost market value but exceeded it by 22%. The Washington standards had been incorporated into transportation regulations across 3 countries. Unity's training programs were being licensed to corporations across industries. What began with a slap had evolved into a movement. 5 years passed. Unity Airlines dominated American aviation, not merely as the largest carrier but as the standard by which others were measured. Its market capitalization had tripled. Its passenger satisfaction metrics consistently led the industry. Most significantly, its discrimination complaints had dropped 97% from Continental's historical baseline. Elijah Washington, now 20 years old and a junior at Howard University, had grown into a thoughtful young man studying business with a focus on social entrepreneurship. Though he maintained a low public profile, his experiences had shaped his worldview and ambitions. His senior thesis examining transportation equity had already received attention from policy experts. On a crisp autumn morning, Elijah found himself in the Unity Airlines lounge at Reagan National Airport, waiting for his flight to Atlanta. He still visited his grandmother Pauline regularly, though she now lived in a luxury retirement community funded by her son's success rather than the modest Harlem apartment where she'd raised Jamal. "Mr. Washington." Elijah looked up from his laptop to find a woman in her early 40s standing before him. For a moment, he didn't recognize her. Her hair was different, natural curls instead of the tight blonde bun he remembered. The severe makeup was gone. But the eyes were unmistakable. "Ms. Reynolds," he said quietly, his pulse quickening slightly at the unexpected encounter. "I'm sorry to disturb you," Brittany said, visibly nervous. "I recognized you and I've thought about this moment for years, whether I'd ever have the chance to apologize in person." She gestured to a nearby chair. "May I?" Elijah hesitated, then nodded. As she sat, he noticed she wore a Unity Airlines employee badge with Corporate Training Division printed beneath her name. "You work for Unity?" he asked, surprised. 3 years now," she confirmed. "Not as cabin crew, obviously. I work in the Accountability to Action program, sharing my story with new employees. Your father's organization gave me a second chance I didn't deserve." The irony wasn't lost on Elijah. "I wasn't aware my father had hired you." "He didn't personally. I went through the standard application process, was rejected twice before being accepted conditionally. No special treatment." She smiled faintly. "Quite the opposite, actually. I'm probably the most closely monitored employee in the company." Elijah studied her, searching for any hint of the hostile woman who had struck him 5 years earlier. He found none. "My behavior that day was inexcusable," Brittany continued. "I won't insult you by offering explanations or excuses. I just want you to know that I'm profoundly sorry, and I've worked every day since to become someone who deserves the opportunity your father's company gave me." Elijah was silent for a long moment. The memory of that day. The shock, the humiliation, the small trickle of blood down his cheek, remained vivid. Yet so did the transformation that had followed, the industry-wide changes, the thousands of travelers who now experienced dignity rather than discrimination. My father often says that true reconciliation isn't about forgetting the past, Elijah finally responded. It's about creating a future where those injuries can't happen again. Brittany nodded, tears forming in her eyes. That's what I try to teach. My story, our story, has become a powerful lesson. When I describe what happened, I always emphasize that it wasn't just about one bad decision. It was about systems that enabled discrimination, biases I hadn't confronted, and a corporate culture that prioritized damage control over genuine change. Their conversation continued as boarding for Elijah's flight was announced. Walking toward the gate, they exchanged perspectives on Unity's evolution and the broader impact on transportation equity. Despite the painful history between them, they found common ground in their commitment to continuing progress. At the boarding door, Brittany extended her hand. Thank you for listening. It means more than you know. Elijah shook her hand, a symbolic gesture of reconciliation if not complete forgiveness. Safe travels, Ms. Reynolds. You too, Mr. Washington. Aboard the aircraft, Elijah settled into seat 2A, the same position he'd occupied that fateful day 5 years earlier. The differences were immediately apparent. The flight attendant greeted him with the same professional courtesy extended to all passengers. The digital welcome screen displayed his name without anyone questioning his presence in first class. The boarding process proceeded smoothly, free from the tension he'd once experienced. As the plane pushed back from the gate, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Unity Airlines Flight 522 to Atlanta. I'm Captain Michaels, and on behalf of our chairman Jamal Washington and the entire Unity family, we're honored to serve you today. Elijah smiled at the reference to his father, now a legendary figure in American business. The Washington name had become synonymous with corporate responsibility and the power of principled leadership. Jamal had recently announced the expansion of the Washington Initiative for travel equality into other sectors, hospitality, retail, healthcare, bringing the same commitment to dignity and equal treatment beyond transportation. The annual Unity in the Skies conference had become the premier corporate responsibility event, drawing executives from Fortune 500 companies eager to implement similar transformations. The Washington family had established a scholarship program for minority students pursuing careers in aviation and transportation policy. 20 Washington scholars were currently studying at universities across the country, preparing to carry forward the mission of equality in movement. As Unity Flight 522 reached cruising altitude, Elijah opened his laptop to review notes for his upcoming presentation at the Scholarship Program Symposium. His phone chimed with a text from his father. Just heard you met Brittany Reynolds today. How are you feeling? Elijah typed thoughtfully, I'm okay. Strange to see her after all this time, but it felt important somehow. Full circle. Jamal's response came quickly, that's the thing about circles. They keep moving forward even as they return to their starting points. You ended up in the same seat on the same route, but in an entirely different world. Elijah glanced out the window at the clouds below, considering his father's words. From a single moment of injury had come transformation far beyond anything they could have imagined. His cheek had healed without a scar, but the impact of that slap continued to reshape American business and culture. The captain's voice interrupted his reflection. Ladies and gentlemen, I have a special announcement. Today marks the 5th anniversary of Unity Airlines. To celebrate, I'm honored to reveal that Elijah Washington, son of our chairman, is aboard our flight today. Mr. Washington recently became the youngest minority owner in commercial aviation history, having acquired a 5% stake in Unity through his own investment venture. Surprised passengers turned toward Elijah, their expressions showing recognition and respect rather than the suspicion he'd once encountered. Several smiled and nodded acknowledgement. The captain continued, Mr. Washington's experience 5 years ago transformed not just our airline but our entire industry. Today, we honor that legacy by recommitting ourselves to the dignity of every passenger, regardless of appearance, background, or circumstance. As applause filled the cabin, Elijah felt a complex mixture of emotions: pride in what his family had accomplished, gratitude for the opportunity to create change, and hope for the continuing journey toward true equality. What had begun with pain had evolved into purpose. The slap that once stung his cheek had ultimately struck a blow against discrimination itself. And that, perhaps, was the most powerful reconciliation of all. This story illustrates how individual acts of discrimination reflect broader systemic issues that often go unchallenged until someone with power decides to act. Jamal Washington could have accepted a settlement and moved on, but he recognized that true change requires transforming the systems that enable discrimination, not just punishing individual offenders. The transformation of Continental Airways demonstrates that addressing discrimination isn't just morally right, it's good business. By creating genuinely inclusive environments, companies can expand their markets, strengthen customer loyalty, and build sustainable value. Perhaps most importantly, this narrative shows the power of strategic patience and leverage. Rather than immediate outrage, Jamal responded with calculated determination, using his resources and influence to create lasting change that benefited not just his family but countless travelers who would never face the humiliation his son experienced. The story also reminds us that reconciliation doesn't require forgetting past injuries, but rather ensuring those injuries can't happen again. True healing comes through transformation, not just apology. What would you have done in Jamal Washington's position? Would you have accepted a settlement or fought for systemic change? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story of justice and transformation resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful stories that show how individuals can challenge discrimination. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that standing up against injustice can transform entire industries. Thank you for watching, and remember, when we refuse to accept discrimination, we create the possibility of a more dignified world for everyone.